Welcome to this fifth session of the second edition of the ACMHangouts hosted by Arts Council Malta. As you are aware by now, during these sessions, we are inviting professionals, experts, as well as creative practitioners to join our discussions focusing on a range of different topics related to arts and creativity. And we are also discussing in more detail points which are pertinent to the new Arts Council Malta strategy. The sessions are all streamed on the Arts Council Malta Facebook page and are then available on the same page in case you'd like to check them out at a later date. Today we are focusing on a very important subject, the subject of sustainability and implementation of sustainable practices in the artistic world. So in a context where sustainable development and green practices are taking center stage and becoming more and more pertinent in the fight against climate change, how can the arts contribute? How can artistic practice encourage and promote environmental sustainability and respond to imminent ecological concerns? These are some of the points which we are going to be tackling during today's session. Our panel today is made up of Christabel Catania, who is the Education and Development Associate at Arts Council Malta, and Elise Tonna, Architect, Cultural Manager and Curator. Throughout the session, we are also going to have a number of different speakers joining us through Zoom. So I would now like to give the floor to Christabel for an introduction about today's subject. Christabel?
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation as well, because it's quite a vast subject. And to start off, perhaps I will provide a bit of a wider context and which explains a bit my approach to sustainability as well. So at Arts Council, I take care of education and development, as you well said, which are themselves quite vast and can be applied also to a variety of different contexts. And my approach, in fact, has always been to embrace that bit of a hybrid state, that in between. And I sought to collaborate with various institutions, various organizations, and seek as many cross-sectoral collaborations as possible. In fact, we have collaborations with, for example, the Malta Council for Science and Technology, where we have various hybrid projects as well. We have collaborations with Agenzia Zaza and various other institutions as well. Some of them will be new also for the new strategy, which we're quite excited about as well. But why am I mentioning this? I believe that when you approach a topic from different perspectives, it can also provide you with an opportunity to create a new narrative. It encompasses various opinions, various perspectives and viewpoints, which also give a better understanding of the topic, in my opinion. And this is also the way I approach sustainability. I look at sustainability from the wider perspective, which has its logical aspect, its scientific aspect, political as well, but also its emotional and its value-centered approach, which focuses on the human, on the care element, and also stewardship of the earth, which we are responsible for as well. In more practical terms, sustainability for me looks at three main areas: economic, sustainability, environmental, and also social. And also when applying this to the creative industries, obviously the creative industries seek to be economically sustainable, they seek growth, but they should also be looking at making their organizations more inclusive. And whenever possible, any person who seeks to engage with creativity and the arts should be allowed to do so. Organizations should also care for the environment they are embedded in and create projects which also respond to the changes that are happening. So in a nutshell, for me, what can ACM and the arts do to contribute to sustainability? Firstly, again, I highlight cross-sectoral collaborations, which for me are important, especially in the decision-making process as well. Let's involve as many voices as possible. We need new solutions to recurring problems, and this can only be done if we think differently as well. Which brings me to the second point, which is involving the youths. I believe youths can bring a new perspective. They are the ones who generally don't take no for an answer, they take more risks, and they should also be involved in when making strategic choices about our way forward. The third point is encourage political agendas, encourage voices and people to take a stand. Arts Council Malta has been very active when it comes to youth and art activism as well. In fact, there's a wonderful group of youths which are coming together and really taking political, showing political agendas as well in their work. Then I would say find best practices, encouraging them, promoting them, see the way they work, and create a ripple effect from there. Then I would say also as an organization, as a governmental organization, embed sustainability in all our practices, and that would encourage also the users of, for example, our funds, of our initiatives, to also do the same. I will conclude here, because I think I've said quite a bit, and I will conclude with a motto from the People's Climate March, that to change everything we need everyone, and this includes also artists and creatives.
Exactly. Well, Christabel, you certainly touched upon very important points which we are going to be discussing during this session. I would actually like to take a step back and ask Elise a question about the term sustainability. As you said, Christabel, it's something which is referred to quite often, but I am sometimes a bit afraid that it's becoming a little bit of a buzzword without understanding exactly what it is, like what Christabel said, embedding the sustainability in our work. So what are your thoughts about this?
Firstly, thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Christabel, for that very concise but direct discussion and interpretation of the word sustainability. First and foremost, I think sustainability can encompass various meanings. I completely agree with the issues and aspects that Christabel highlighted, such as accessibility and inclusion. Because after all, if we are not accessible and if we are not inclusive, then how will the arts thrive? And if the arts will not thrive, then how are we going to have different interpretations towards different socio-political, social, whatever, it could be whatever topic of discussion, the artistic output is ultimately creating. Sustainability in general is often referred to in terms of the green aspect. So, for example, how can artistic practice be more green and be more friendly towards our environment? There are, of course, certain artistic practices which can be green. However, sometimes we cannot also compromise the product which is actually being created. However, compromise, I think, is a very important issue when it comes to sustainability. We have to keep in mind the principles, our impact on the environment, on our surroundings, on the different communities, and on, after all, the future, the people who are to come and what legacies we're going to leave behind. After all, I think sustainability is more about the legacy. And also this issue of accessibility, even in terms, for example, of public art. We can use public art to highlight, to enable artists to highlight more issues which are pertinent, such as climate change, for example. In terms of public art, we are combining these different aspects, which are inclusion, accessibility, and also activism, as Christabel rightly pointed out. I think sustainability is a very, very vast topic.
Exactly.
And especially when merged with the arts and the environment combined together, it's quite, we can go on forever. But I think these terms rightfully point out the most important issues which relate to sustainability.
Exactly, and you also mentioned the activism aspect, and I think the arts have always been quite vociferous. They have always pointed out that we need to talk about sustainability, that it is an important subject. So what are your thoughts about this? As in, is it enough? Do we need to have more like artists advocating for this subject, in favor of the subject?
I don't think it's enough. I mean, art activism is a growing area, but even when we started our program, it's based on a mentoring aspect as well. So it takes a lot of months and weeks to work with the group also for them to understand exactly what it is and how they can contribute. I think the arts have a power in a way to also grasp with complex subjects. Climate change is a huge subject, you know, it's very complex and maybe hard to grasp with the scientific terms as well. So the arts can make it a bit more human. We can actually experience for example, it comes to my mind, there was a project which explained climate change by planting a tree and seeing literally the process of the tree growing and decaying. So it's just literally, it can create a wider engagement as well, I think, with the topic in a way which the public understands and engages with from their own perspective.
Relates to somehow
Exactly.
in one way or another.
Exactly. For me, art activism, it's about that, creating that connection between the emotional aspect and the logical aspect as well.
What's your experience, Elise? I know that you were actually involved in such projects.
Yes, first and foremost, I think activism and art activism needs to be facilitated. We need to engage and allow more artists to be, to express. After all, artists are very sensitive to their contexts, the society at large. And they are the rightful people to engage and absorb and obviously create and interpret. With regards to activism, there are different elements which relate to activism. Of course, there's, on a policy level, people need to engage. We need to see more people engaging with policies, with strategies, in order to be able to give input related to certain matters which count to everyone, not only policymakers. So we need to see and engage with more grassroots approaches. Then there is also the artistic side to activism. So, for example, when artists engage with certain matters and through their work they are highlighting these issues. Sometimes that allows more connection with the people, because people sometimes, in general communities, it's not easy sometimes to understand certain policies or certain terminologies. So the work itself, especially when it is very much related to the context and community it is placed at, then the artist can be the person or the persons which represent certain topics and communicate in a certain manner.
In a way, they can translate, act as
Exactly.
translators between the policy and the community.
And the abstract, maybe abstract concept, the concept which seems to be far away from our daily lives. But okay, and on that note, I would actually like to introduce Lucy Latham from Julie's Bicycle. Lucy, can you describe the work which is carried out by Julie's Bicycle? I know that you actively seek ways how creativity can actually enable change. How can this be done, in your opinion?
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved the conversation so far. So, Julie's Bicycle, just to briefly introduce you, we are an organization founded in 2007, working globally across the creative sector to reduce environmental impacts and catalyze what we call a new creative ecology. And I think this term is trying to pull on the threads that all of you have raised so far in this panel. What are the different ways the cultural sector can act on this issue? You know, it's the practice, it's the operations, it's the environmental impact management and reduction, but it's also the values, the principles, the vision, the mission statement, the governance structures, artist activist, cultural programming and commissioning. It's this whole kind of constellation of different interventions that the arts and culture are so well placed to take in response to this question of environmental sustainability. And this is what we try and cover in this term, a new and sustainable creative ecology. But in terms of our practice, we work with organizations, cultural institutions, cultural funders, cultural policymakers, to really harness that power of the creative sector to communicate the reality of the climate crisis and to communicate the imperative of action that is, related to what the science is telling us. We really try and ground our work in a science-based response and looking at science-based solutions and practical actions. So that's Julie's Bicycle in a kind of a nutshell, and we have a lot of resources that are available on our website, various guides and fact sheets that you can read and understand more about our work, and also learn more about our kind of recommendations for more sustainable creative practice.
Lucy, can you give us maybe some ideas of actual projects which you have led or which you have commissioned and which actually brought about the desired change?
Yeah, sure. So one of my projects that I'm personally responsible for is our partnership with our national cultural funder, Arts Council England. And this, this partnership is, I suppose, our flagship support program, and it is trying to work with the cultural sector to reduce impacts and support these new creative practices. And it's based on a policy intervention which started in 2012, whereby all of the national portfolio have to report on their key environmental impacts and also develop documents like an environmental policy and an environmental action plan. So connecting these environmental reporting requirements to cultural funding has basically normalized it and made it embedded in the way organizations would conduct themselves, kind of speaking to that good governance point I mentioned before. And we found this to be a very successful intervention. Obviously, we've been doing it for a number of years. We're currently in our third contract. We see environmental reductions across the estate, so a 4.5% reduction in energy use across 1,200 organisations, which is an equivalent to around £10 million in energy savings. We see organisations' environmental literacy increasing year on year, their ability to report robust data. We also see, other brilliant things that we find out through our surveys and through our qualitative data connection, like that organizations are reporting improved reputational benefits from engaging with environmental sustainability, that there is enhanced staff well-being in response to the environmental program. That there are a year-on-year increase in creative responses to environmental issues, and this is something that, although it's a kind of anecdotal insight, it's really important because it suggests that the good practice is mutually supportive with the creative response, and that the more organizations feel confident in their action on environmental issues, the more likely it then is to permeate in communications, in advocacy, in public speaking, in creative programming. And this is what we want. We want all of these opportunities realized.
Lucy, so what is the practical advice which you give to these various organizations that are implementing these this policy or these strategies? As in, could you maybe share with us a couple of ideas of how we can actually make practice more sustainable? Obviously, now we're talking about the whole sphere of arts here, which is a very difficult thing to do, but maybe you can share with us a couple of examples.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there are some key steps or a formula organizations can take. It's relates to our theory of change. The first is to commit to action, and that's looking at your policies and your governance documents. So making a public declaration and commitment to action, which can then feed into your planning and your sort of business development and your direction of travel as an organization. So that commitment, which is really about governance, policy, roles and responsibilities, is really critical. The second step is around understanding. So that's about what are your environmental impacts. They will be really different if you're a small touring organization, or you're a large theatre, or maybe you're an artist or working with a whole community of artists. So these very different practices will have different environmental impacts. One might focus more on travel, another will be energy or perhaps waste or materials and procurement. So that understanding part is about knowing where your impact lies and then being able to develop appropriate responses to it, which leads to the third point, which is improvement. So this again actually is a sort of a governance question, because it's about having the structures in place to support reductions, having an environmental action plan, having a group of people who are actually responsible and accountable for environmental impact management. And then lastly, it's communicate. So we always find these brilliant organizations doing loads of great work, but they don't necessarily see it as something to talk about with their audiences and with their stakeholders and with their supply chain. So the communications point is really about leveraging that amazing platform arts and culture has to advocate for these issues and to talk about the work they're doing, whether it's a play about climate change or whether it's about the fact they've moved their building to renewable energy.
Thank you, Lucy, for sharing with us those very, very important and relevant points. And I would actually like to see what the panel thinks of Lucy's intervention. Do you feel that there is enough consideration, environmental consideration in local artistic practice? I mean, I'm speaking both in terms of the government organizations and also the independent practice.
I think there is significant amount of awareness. However, there needs to be more action. Lucy mentioned a lot of important points. However, locally, I think action we still need to strive to actually implement and practice what's on paper, basically. I mean, I've personally worked with quite a number of organizations and institutions who have these policies drafted, and but the question is how much are they put into practice, and also whether there is the ability to actually put them into practice. When talking about non-profits, for example, the resources are obviously very limited. I mean, for example, at the Gabriel Caruana Foundation, we are, both Rafaela, my colleague, and myself are very much aware and very much environmentally conscious. We do switch off the lights during the day and try to reduce energy reduction. However, obviously, there is a lot. Most of our work is on a voluntary basis, so there is a lot to take in and a lot of compromise that needs to be kind of taken into consideration.
But what would you say enables this to take place? Is it funds? Is it, like Lucy was mentioning, kind of a stricter direction in terms of what needs to be done?
In general, there needs to be a significant amount of motivation. So people need to actually, it also becomes in part ingrained within ourselves that we have to take care of our environment. And that comes from not only being aware of our impact on the environment, but it also is up to kind of on the willingness for us to actually implement and participate in this common cause. Lack of funds is, I think, one part, but it's not the whole part. I think motivation and willingness is actually the more important, and also awareness on what our actions are carrying out, like how are we affecting the environment?
It's true. In fact, Lucy mentioned an interesting point, the aspect of communication, right? It's not very usual that then you would go out there and say, look, this is what I did. So I think it would make a little bit of a difference if everyone kind of shared their own work in relation to the subject, possibly. But it's something that I actually never really thought about. So from your perspective, Christabel, I mean, you work at the Arts Council. I know that you also follow work which is done by the public cultural organizations. So what happens there and what's being done?
I particularly like the point of making the commitment publicly, which I think is also crucial. And when there's lack of motivation, perhaps it kind of forces organizations as well to be more sustainable in their practice. I believe sustainability, it will only be possible if organizations truly embed it in their practice and everyday practice. So, for example, with COVID-19, we realize that some meetings are better done online, for example, rather than commute to the offices and just to meet, for half an hour. Sometimes you travel for more. Sometimes it's simple changes which are important and create an impact. That also brings the point of education, as we mentioned. It's important that people know the impact they are causing on the environment. Simple, even organizing an event, what's my impact? What can I do to improve it? And I think as Arts Council, sustainability is not one pillar of the strategy. It should be in every part of the strategy. Literally, it should be. We should tackle education through the sustainability element. We should tackle diversity through the sustainability. So it's literally it should be the way we are and the way we approach things, rather than a list of actions, perhaps. Although having a green policy will obviously help, and as we said, making it public, making the commitment, communicating your actions as well, because I'm sure many organizations are conscious of their impact on the environment. Perhaps bringing attention to it and kind of blowing your own horn in a way.
Exactly.
It's also creates that message. As I said, it's a bit of a ripple effect, finding the best practices and promoting them, showing, how they work and how that can be embedded into longer sustainable practice.
Exactly, and on that note, I'd like to refer to an actual example of how a green policy is being implemented by a local organization, Festivals Malta. It is a pleasure to have with us Annabelle Stivana, who is the director of Festivals Malta. So Annabelle, I know that as an entity you have carried out research and you have a policy which actually you implement in all your festivals. So can you, how did you go about that, and can you share with us some examples of how you actually go about implementing that?
Great. Thank you, Elaine, and thank you to all the contributors. Essentially, Festivals Malta drafted and launched the sustainable policy, which was part of the FM strategy in late 2017. And over the last few years, we have employed various creative practices to try to make sure that we abide by by the framework that we created. And I must say, it hasn't been all that easy. I think it was Christabel who mentioned, or the other lady, I don't remember, how difficult and how sometimes it is not even sustainable to, because the cost is quite is on the high side. However, we tried to develop a clear policy regarding sustainability to lead Malta's our events to international standards, and implement a strong network of collaborations within event organizers. So we weren't just doing it for us, but like whenever we contracted an artist, when we contracted suppliers, we always included that part in the contract so that they could also follow that through. Because if our suppliers don't follow that through, then it's pointless for us to have the framework. We provided something which is very important, I believe, is training. If we want our people to own it, our staff to own it, our artists to own it, then we need to train. And moreover, is having someone to follow that the training and what is being said is being actually lived up to. Because we found that if you, especially in this COVID environment, when we weren't having any events or things were slipping somehow. So we had to train the people again, and from time to time, even in simple staff meetings, we remind our people, our staff, and our artists that we need to understand first and commit ourselves to this philosophy. Because unless we understand that this is a philosophy that we need to own, it won't happen. So training and commitment, and Lucy also mentioned how an organization needs to feel comfortable and to start owning the matter. So yes, the training was very important. In terms of actual events, we have to go to pre-COVID now. We had done a number of initiatives there. And we started off with one of our main festivals, which was Anna Fest, and we tried to communicate what we're doing to our audiences with simple signs and a lot of light where the signs were, because sometimes the signs are there, but they are not well lit for people to see and understand, because we have to understand that during a festival there's a certain amount of confusion there. So you need to communicate the message quite clearly for the audiences to understand how they should react. And we had also introduced plastic cups, but reusable plastic cups, which people could take home with the logo of the festival, and which they could reuse, even for the next year, perhaps. So yes, a lot of initiatives were introduced. I don't know if I'm over my time, Elaine.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And actually, I think the points which you mentioned it's interesting for us to see actual examples of how this is done. As you said, it's not very easy because you're challenging a mentality. You're challenging what we have always done since we were very young. That we drink our drinks in plastic cups and we throw them away, and that's it. So I think I don't know if you have any more such examples to share with us in terms of the.
If I could use some more time,
Yeah.
and we had introduced obviously the waste separation bills, monitoring the waste collection. That wasn't quite easy to do actually, but eventually we had to bring on board a different company for waste collection and for monitoring the waste collection. We had social media posts as well, and then we did the post-event statistics of the waste collection. And then we communicated that. We do that in the offices because unless you start, charity starts at home, they say. So unless you start in the office, unless you start within the group, with the core group, then the message cannot be portrayed beyond that. Signage, as I said, was very important. And what we also do here, we try to, because finite resources are very important as well. So the consumption of electricity, water, within reason. So yes, we try to do actually, even when it came to choosing our offices, we chose offices with a lot of sunlight, so that we try not to consume a lot of energy. But then there are things which I think globally we need to understand better, because sometimes we do something and then when we actually implement what we decide to do, it takes up a lot of energy differently.
Yeah.
However, I believe that creativity and the artistic expression provide energy and inspiration, as well as empowerment. So even within our sector, we can do a lot. Because apart from the greening, then we're very careful when we program events in terms of inclusivity, in terms of education, in terms of also in terms of greening. So it goes beyond the communication, and it goes beyond waste. And what the responsibility we have as Festivals Malta is that we communicate certain messages, these very important messages, through what we program, through our offer, our culture offer.
Thank you. Thanks, Annabelle, for sharing those thoughts. I think she did mention a couple of very important points. Like you were saying, Elise, it's the difficulty in implementing what you say. So any reactions to what Annabelle shared?
One aspect that has not perhaps been touched upon so far is on the same lines as sustainability, is the fact that we should also work more local. So I'm not referring to, for example, that we should not bring in international artists, but perhaps we should, yes, bring along an international artist who collaborates with more local practitioners. For example, why does, for example, in the case of visual arts, why does the work need to be manifested abroad and brought to Malta, and there is the transportation and the commute, as Christabel was rightly mentioning first. Why not bring the artist simply on a flight to Malta and let him, her, or them implement and create the work locally, working with local materials, encouraging economic activity? I think that is also another aspect related to sustainability.
I mean, this cannot be applied in all art forms and in all projects, obviously. So it's a matter of selecting maybe what you need to focusing on. But yeah, using resources efficiently in this sense, I think will make a difference.
Something I picked up from Annabelle's intervention was the point of ownership as well. And I think here I will highlight the importance of co-creation as well, which can be quite universal as well. Once we co-create policies, strategies, action, environmental action, artistic intervention with a wide section of the public, it's easier for the principles to be taken on board. If, for example, a green policy is co-created between the whole, every person in the organization, it's easier for every person to do its role within with that policy. The same with the environment. I've seen really nice projects also with students in schools where I think Christina will talk later on it. We had students walking in their car and seeing their environment and noticing the environment around them. So sometimes it's simple action, but the fact that you're involving as many people as possible creates a larger impact.
Exactly. I would now like to introduce Luke Azzopardi in this discussion. Luke is Equatoria, is a creative director, and through his work he has been looking for solutions and ways to regenerate. So I feel that his work is very much focused on sustainability as a term which is very much embedded in his work. So Luke, what are your thoughts about what we've been discussing so far? And also I would like to see how and what you think of artistic sustainability in this sense.
So thanks for the invitation. Really interesting discussion so far. From my point of view, it's actually a bit more difficult because I work in the fashion industry, and the fashion industry has been notoriously known to be a contributing factor to CO2 emissions, degradation of the environment, and so on. So what I do starts from the hypothetical or theoretical point that I belong to an industry which is actually a bit anti-sustainability, and which perhaps in hindsight has not been following the procedures necessary to survive or exist while still protecting the environment. So what we have been doing as a studio is advocating slow fashion, which is quite literally the opposite of what we know today as being the fast fashion movement, which makes up the largest chunk of the fashion market. So with fast fashion, you have seasonality. So clothes are meant to change and go out of style very quickly. You have the idea that designers and design houses and studios sell at wholesale prices to redistributors, so certified redistributors, which then throw away or dispose of the clothing which doesn't sell. And you also have the idea of predetermined seasonality, which is when you create collections which are meant to go in store at a certain date, so for a season later or 2 seasons later, and then they have to be removed from the stores after that season is over. So in being a slow fashion studio, we're trying to do away with seasonality. So we're trying to do away with the concept that fashion comes with a sort of expiry date, which is of course very difficult because when you showcase your work, when you're taking part in presentations or collective presentations such as fashion weeks, you're obviously bound by certain rules which actually are predetermined by the fast fashion movement. So in a way, you're working within parameters which actually are counterproductive, because in showcasing with or in collaboration with presentations such as fashion weeks, you're actually adding to the narrative that fashion should come with seasonality. So what we focus on as a studio is creating garments which work a bit like heirlooms. So they're intended to be passed down through generations. And the only way you do that is by using top-tier luxury materials, which we try to source from family-run businesses, independent businesses, and small businesses from all over the world. And businesses which focus on quality production. Now, with fabric manufacturing, it's very difficult to get to a point where you're carbon neutral. So what you can do in order to combat that is to firstly try to use recycled fabrics or archival fabrics. But when that is not possible or when that is not readily available, what you do is you look at top tier luxury, because when you use those sorts of fabrics, your clients would be sort of inclined never to throw the garment away, but to sort of hand it down, to reuse it, to try to find new purposes for its use. If it's a bridal gown, it could be perhaps re-dyed and cut short. So you try to make the most out of the garment. We also keep away from dangerous synthetic fibers. I mean, we live on an island and we're surrounded by the sea. And the degradation of the Mediterranean Sea is something which we're always concerned about as a studio. So what we do to tackle this problem is not to use synthetic fibers, synthetic microfibers, things like nylons, polyesters, and triestite acrylics, and so on, because we know that upon washing, these fibers release a lot of microplastics into the sea. And this doesn't happen upon the first cycle. Every time you wash the garment, you get more and more fibers detaching themselves from the garment and ending up into the sea. And because of that bioaccumulation, we end up poisoning the natural cycles. And the ways within which you can actually recollect this poisoning is also depends on making use of energy. So it really is a vicious cycle that is very difficult to get out of. So we try not to be complicit in this sort of methods of bioaccumulation by using firstly natural fibers. So we're looking at silks, we're looking at wools, we're looking at certain types of rayons, we're looking at certain types of viscose which are made out of recycled wood materials. And creating garments out of these. Another way of trying to bypass all of these problems is by creating bespoke and made-to-measure garments. So when we're looking at made-to-measure, really and truly, we're creating things in collaboration with our clients. And in doing so, we're sort of strongly suggesting that these things are made specifically for them, and in a way they're special. So they'll never be thrown away and people will be inclined to keep on wearing them over and over. It's not about how many garments you own, but what kind of garments you have, how bespoke they are, and what quality fabrics they're made up of. In order to also counter the problem of carbon footprinting, we also try to work from a direct consumer methodology. So that is, we have our own online store. We don't have a lot of redistributors, both locally and internationally. So that way we sort of bypass the middleman, and then bypassing the middleman, we're also doing away with extra transportation, with extra freights, with extra uses of energy. So that is either electricity to run whatever the reseller is trying to run, whether or not it's a mall or it's another business or it's something which is not online. So we literally send garments directly to consumers internationally, and we try not to have redistributors. And we also try to, we're sort of known for prints, and we try to, as much as possible, use eco-friendly inks. So eco-friendly inks are made out of vegetable and use vegetable dyes. They're not synthetic inks, which again contribute to poisoning when they're washed. And the good thing about vegetable-based inks is that they also help communities outside of Europe, such as, for example, we use an Indian family-run business to create our prints, and there is this sort of like giving back to the community from which you order. So even when it comes to trading, these family-run businesses and houses based in India have this sort of a system within which the farmers which create the vegetable dyes and inks, and also the farmers which create the silks and the cotton and so on, are rewarded. So we also have to look at ethical sustainability as well, because there is a tendency, especially in our industry, to greenwash. So you'll be sort of using this sort of sustainable facade in order to hide other problems, other ethical problems, which again, the fashion industry is notoriously known for. So in a way, it's a very difficult exercise of trying to combine sustainability with ethical models of production. And when combining the two, you really reach a point where you can say, okay, whatever you're doing is both ethical and sustainable. And I think that's very important for an industry which is very dangerous. Because really and truly, unlike, for example, fine art, producers and designers working in the applied art industry need to make sure, perhaps more than fine artists, that what they're doing is economically viable, just because it depends on sales. So I think that justifies, or in some people's eyes, justifies methods or methods of production which are not exactly sustainable or ethical.
Look, unfortunately, I have to stop you there. I think this is a very interesting, excellent example of how artistic practice, in the sense, has truly embedded sustainability in your brand, in the way you do things, and in what you propose to your customers. And this ties in pretty nicely with the project which Christina Bort, who's with us through Zoom, has been working on, the project You Are What You Buy. So Christina, what are your thoughts about what Luke just said, what we said earlier, and also what were the impacts of your project?
Hi Elaine, hi everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. Well, a good number of points which I will touch upon have already been mentioned by both the panel and also the guest speakers on Zoom. So I've been finding myself like nodding all the time. So You Are What You Buy is a transdisciplinary project, and that is a very important factor for me, which I know Christabel already alluded to, this cross-sectoral practice, both in terms of what the project addresses, so in terms of content, subject matter, and thematics, but also the team members that form You Are What You Buy. So we are a group of different creative practitioners from different art forms, but not only, such as, for example, we always had on board right from the beginning a cultural anthropologist who has guided our research. So You Are What You Buy relates to current issues relating to consumption and consumerism. That's like, let's say, the general gist of the project. And it actually started off in 2016, 2017, with a very experimental approach where we were questioning the effects of consumption on us as buyers, like the effect on our choices, on our decisions when it comes to buying certain products, what kind of thinking processes do we go through if we go through certain thinking processes, and what affects our buying choices, which could range from marketing strategies to emotional attachments to certain products, to certain brands. So that was the first edition of the project, which was specific to to one local supermarket, which had a research phase and a performative element. But in the wake of the pandemic last year, around March, April 2020, we felt that it was our almost responsibility and duty to revisit the project and not ignore what was happening around us and how this new pandemic has, well, it is still affecting our production, shopping, and consumption habits. And we decided to actually work on a second edition, which was earmarked as a remote edition. And this time round, it's mainly focused on research. That was the main point. And it also, let's say, widened the research field, being more inclusive in terms of what type of sectors we looked at. So it wasn't just the supermarket, but it was a series of different type of shops, from the very small bazaar, local bazaar in a village, to different groceries, to online services, deliveries, green businesses, for example, but also to other places which offer a service, for example, or cafes and restaurants. And last but not least, which was a very important factor which emerged throughout the past few months, is self-production. And so how that could possibly link to alternative forms of economy. So, as I said, it's mainly focused on research and like how can all this act as a catalyst for change in our production, shopping, and consumption patterns, leading to a new ethical and sustainable normal. And how can we reach that? So we questioned, is it a matter of possibly changing our daily rituals, our daily habits? Is it finding a compromise between what I need and what I want? So is it a need? Is it a desire, for example? And at the same time, not forgetting other crises which are still surrounding us, because all of a sudden, at one point, maybe the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, it took center stage. But of course, climate change, as we have been discussing, remains present. But not only, other humanitarian, social issues like migration and the similar issues, of course, they are still present. So we wanted to also look at potential new experiences and look at them from the future. So we did actually have exercises where we tried to kind of write a note to ourselves together with our co-creators, like thinking from the future. And in doing so, you are what you buy, and this is, I think, a characteristic of the project, and also linking a bit to your very first question of how can artistic practice contribute to sustainability and ethical practices. You are what you buy has always asked questions, and in order to answer these questions, it has always posed further provoking questions. So the idea is not to give a direct answer to the consumer, for example, to the audience, but it's a project which invites us to think, to reflect on our own personal habits, on our personal daily practices, so that we can engage into more critical thinking processes. So yes, we question ourselves and our practices.
Thank you, Christina, for sharing those thoughts and your experience in relation to the project You Are What You Buy. Unfortunately, we have to conclude the session here. There is certainly many other points to mention, other things to say. It's as we said, I mean, we started off the session by saying this is a huge subject, but maybe one final comment from your end before we conclude the session. Elise.
Yes, to follow up with what Christina was saying, yes, let's question, let's evaluate what we are doing, but furthermore, let's ultimately act.
Take action.
Yes, to conclude as well, I'll tie in with what Christina and Elise just said. That's something that we just said in policy as well. Let's not waste a good crisis, and this has been a very huge crisis. So let's learn from it, and let's co-create, collaborate, so that we create new narratives as well. Let's make sustainability the way we live, not just, a big buzzword out there.
So I would like to thank you for being here. Thank you, Arts Council Malta, for hosting these ACM Hangouts. Thank you to our guests today for contributing to this very interesting conversation. Feel free to leave us a message on our Facebook page if you have any comments or if you would like to discuss this subject further. And we'll see you next month for another session of the ACM Hangouts. Take care.